Take that off her wrist before the donors see it." The command sliced across the hospital atrium in front of nearly 200 people. Cameras were already pointed toward the stage. A blue ribbon hung across the new pediatric wing entrance, and behind it, polished glass carried the name of every family who had paid to be seen. But everyone's eyes were on the girl in the borrowed hoodie. Mara Velez stood beside a display table, one hand pressed to the cotton taped over the inside of her elbow. She was 17, small from years of stretching meals, with damp curls tucked behind her ears and sneakers so worn the white rubber had gone gray. Around her wrist was a red plastic hospital tag, the kind patients forget they are wearing until someone treats it like evidence. Graham Bell, the hospital administrator, pinched the tag between two fingers like it was dirty. "This is a donor event," he said, smiling just enough for the cameras. "Not a walk-in clinic." A few guests gave nervous laughs. A woman holding a champagne flute lowered it halfway. At the back, a nurse froze with a tray of sealed envelopes in her hands. Mara tried to pull her wrist back. Bell tightened his grip. "She is uninsured," he said, louder now. "She has no scheduled procedure, no family sponsor, and no authorization to be near the donor wall. Security should have removed her 10 minutes ago." The word uninsured landed harder than it should have. People heard it and made decisions. Some shifted away from her, as if poverty could brush against their coats. Mara's face burned, but she did not cry. She stared at the red tag. On the stage behind Bell, the hospital's biggest benefactor, Dr. Victor Harlan, stood beneath a banner that read, "New Hope Children's Fund." His portrait was printed on the program beside a line about 20 years of life-saving donations. He watched Mara with the cold patience of a man waiting for a stain to be scrubbed off tile. Bell raised his hand toward the security guard near the door. "Escort her out through the service hallway." That was when Mara spoke. "Please don't touch the tag." Her voice was quiet, but something in it made the nearest camera operator stop adjusting his lens. Bell gave a soft laugh. "Sweetheart, this bracelet doesn't make you important." "It's not a bracelet," she said. He glanced down at the small white label attached to it. There was a barcode, a handwritten set of initials, and a faded red sticker marked "Blood Hold." Most of the guests would not know what that meant. Bell clearly assumed she did not either. "Then, let me explain it to you," he said, bending closer so only the front rows could hear the cruelty dressed as patience. "This means you were processed. It does not mean you belong here." A man in the second row stopped filming. Mara swallowed. Her fingers closed around a tiny silver charm on a string at her neck, a bent hospital key someone had flattened into a pendant. It caught the atrium lights for half a second. Dr. Harlan saw it. For the first time since Mara entered, his expression changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Bell did not notice. He was already performing for the room again. "This hospital survives because serious people give serious money," he said. "It cannot function if every charity case believes a plastic tag is a backstage pass." The nurse at the back whispered, "Graham." He ignored her. Mara's eyes lifted to the donor wall. One name was larger than the others. Harlan. Beneath it, in smaller bronze letters, was a promise about compassion. The administrator followed her gaze and smirked. "You're admiring the wall?" he asked. "Good. Learn the difference between people who build hospitals and people who drain them." A sound moved through the crowd, not quite a gasp, not yet outrage, just the first crack in public comfort. Then Bell crossed the line that would cost him everything. He took a pair of medical scissors from the display tray and slid one blade under Mara's red tag. "Hold still." Mara's hand trembled once. Across the room, the nurse dropped the envelopes. Paper scattered over the polished floor. One envelope slid open, revealing a photocopy of an old blood label with the same rare code printed on it. Dr. Harlan stepped down from the stage. "Graham," he said sharply, "leave it." But Bell, drunk on authority, had already lifted the scissors. Mara pulled her wrist away and finally raised her voice. "If you cut it, you cut the only proof my mother left me." The atrium changed. Donors stopped whispering. The guard at the door lowered his radio. The camera light blinked red. Bell's smile thinned. "Your mother?" he said. "What exactly are you accusing this hospital of?" Mara did not answer him right away. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and took out a folded plastic sleeve, taped at the edges, soft from being carried for years. Inside was an old hospital blood tag, older than hers, with a Dr. Harlan's hand closed around the podium. The nurse who had dropped the envelopes covered her mouth, and Graham Bell, who had spent 15 years deciding which patients were worth saving in public and which ones could be hidden from view, finally understood that the girl he had humiliated was not there to beg. She was there to make a record. Within a week, the donor event would be frozen, outside counsel would enter the hospital, and one of the most respected names in Charleston medicine would be fighting to keep his face off the evening news. But to understand why a 17-year-old girl walked into that atrium wearing a red tag like a wound, you have to go back 3 weeks. Back to a bus stop in North Charleston. Back to the night Mara found the blood tag in her mother's sewing tin. 3 weeks earlier, Mara Velez was counting quarters under the yellow light of a laundromat on Rivers Avenue. North Charleston was loud even after midnight. Trucks sighed at the intersection. A train horn dragged across the dark. Inside the laundromat, 6 dryers spun other people's uniforms while Mara sat on the folding table with a notebook open on her knees, writing down what every coin had to become: bus fare, soup, pain medicine, rent extension. She worked mornings at a grocery bakery before school and evenings cleaning exam rooms at a dental office. None of it was official enough to feel stable. Every manager called her reliable, then paid her like she was temporary. At home, if the little duplex behind the pawn shop could be called that, her mother's things still lived in one cardboard box beneath the sink. Elena Velez had been gone 11 months. The cancer had taken her voice first, then her strength, then the soft humming that used to fill their kitchen when bills were late and hope was thin. She had left Mara 2 rules written on a recipe card. Keep your hands clean. Keep your records cleaner. Mara had laughed the first time she read it, because her mother had spent 20 years as a hospital phlebotomy tech and believed paperwork could save a life almost as much as blood could. Elena labeled everything: medicine bottles, school folders, jars of rice, even the emergency cash envelope that never had cash in it for long. The one thing she never explained was the bent hospital key. It hung from a string around Mara's neck, flattened at the end and rubbed smooth from her mother's thumb. Elena had worn it under her scrub top until the hospital let her go. After that, she kept it in her palm whenever the medical bills came. "What does it open?" Mara had asked once. Her mother smiled in the tired way adults do when they are choosing which truth a child can survive. "Memory," she said. That night in the laundromat, Mara was not thinking about memory. She was thinking about the rent notice taped inside her hoodie pocket. The landlord had given her 10 days. If she missed it, he would change the locks and put her mother's box on the curb. The last dryer buzzed. Mara folded towels for the dental office, tied them in plastic, and rode the late bus home with the bundle on her lap. At each stop, she studied the reflection of her own face in the window and tried to see someone older, someone a billing clerk might take seriously. By morning, she was at Mercy Harbor Medical Center, not as a patient, but as a girl with a folder full of unpaid statements. The hospital sat near downtown Charleston, bright and clean against the marsh air, with banners on the parking garage advertising the new pediatric wing. Every banner carried the same name in blue letters: Harlan. Mara hated those letters without knowing why. She had been there before, many times, first trailing behind her mother, later pushing her mother in a wheelchair. Finally standing at the billing desk while a woman explained charity forms like kindness was a maze. Mercy Harbor had patched Elena up, denied one treatment, approved another too late, and sent bills printed on paper so white it felt like an insult. Now Mara needed one thing from them: her mother's employee records. Not all of them. Just the dates. The termination paper. Anything that might prove Elena had worked enough years to qualify for a small survivor benefit from the hospital's old staff fund. A legal aid volunteer had told Mara over the phone that if the hospital still had the file, It could buy time with the landlord. Ask for human resources, the volunteer said. Be polite. Be specific. Don't leave without a receipt. So, Mara took the number ticket and waited under a television playing morning news. A nurse with gray-streaked hair came out of the elevator carrying lab bags. She slowed when she saw Mara. Mara Velez. Mara stood too fast. Yes. The nurse's badge read Ruth Park. I knew your mother, Ruth said, her voice lowered. Elena trained me my first month. Best hands in the lab. No one had said anything that kind about Elena in a hospital hallway since the funeral. Mara felt it in her chest before she could stop it. I'm trying to get her records, she said. Ruth's expression changed. Not sadness. Caution. From HR, Mara nodded. Make sure you ask for the archived personnel file, not the patient file. And if they tell you it doesn't exist, ask them to put that in writing. The advice was too sharp to be casual. Before Mara could ask what she meant, a man in a navy suit crossed the lobby. He was tall, polished, and moving with the confidence of someone the building recognized. Employees straightened as he passed. Ruth's mouth closed. The man paused near the donor display, where workers were installing bronze letters on a marble wall. He corrected the angle of one name with 2 fingers, then glanced toward Ruth and Mara. Ruth busied herself with the lab bags. That's Graham Bell, she murmured. Administrator. Bell's gaze dropped to Mara's worn shoes, then to the folder under her arm, then moved on as if he had read the whole story and found it unprofitable. Mara did not know then how many doors his signature could close. HR denied her request in 12 minutes. The woman behind the glass said Elena Velez's personnel file had been purged during a records transition. There was no benefit application possible without proof of eligibility. No, she could not provide a written denial today. No, there was no supervisor available. No, the hospital could not search by memory. Mara repeated what the legal aid volunteer had told her. I need a receipt showing I asked. The woman's smile stiffened. You're very prepared. My mother taught me. That made the woman stop typing. Mara left with a stamped intake slip, nothing more. At home that night, rain clicked against the kitchen window while she dragged her mother's box from beneath the sink. She had searched it before, but grief makes people miss things. This time, she moved slowly, sorting every envelope, every badge clip, every folded pay stub. Near the bottom sat a round sewing tin with blue flowers on the lid. Inside were buttons, loose needles, a thimble, 2 quarters, and a sealed plastic sleeve taped shut at the edges. Mara lifted it carefully. An old red hospital tag rested inside, brittle with age. Not a wristband exactly, a blood tag, the kind attached to a unit being held for a specific patient or procedure. The ink had faded, but the blood type code was still readable, and at the corner was a red sticker marked Blood Hold. Behind it was a note in Elena's handwriting. If they ever erase me, start here. The rain kept ticking. The refrigerator hummed. In the other room, her phone buzzed with a reminder from the landlord. 10 days. Mara placed the old tag beside the bent key at her throat. The 2 objects did not explain each other, but together they made the apartment feel less empty and more dangerous. The next morning, Mercy Harbor called her number. A woman from billing said Mara's old emergency visit balance had been flagged for review. If she wanted any financial assistance, she needed to come in before the donor event at the end of the month. Bring identification, the woman said, and proof you are uninsured. Mara stared at the sewing tin on the table. Then she put the old tag back into its plastic sleeve, slipped it into her hoodie pocket, and wrote one more line in her notebook. Mercy Harbor wants me quiet before the event. Mercy Harbor had 2 entrances that told 2 different stories. The front entrance opened into marble floors, orchids, and a piano nobody played. Volunteers in blue jackets offered directions with soft voices. A screen near the elevators looped smiling photos of children holding stuffed bears under the words, Care Without Walls. The side entrance, where Mara had gone as a child with her mother, smelled like bleach, wet cardboard, and coffee burned too long on a warmer. Scrub techs came through there with lunch bags. Housekeepers pushed carts through there. Patients who did not know which desk to approach stood there pretending they were not scared. Graham Bell understood both entrances. He had built his career by keeping them apart. In the Charleston Post, Bell was the administrator who modernized compassion. He posed at charity galas with one hand over his heart and talked about expanding access for children. He knew the names of board members' spouses, the schools their grandchildren attended, and which donors preferred handwritten thank you notes. Inside the hospital, his kindness had paperwork attached. No insurance meant no direct admission unless the law forced it. No complete form meant no financial review. No sponsor meant no invitation to speak at the donor event. Bell did not shout often. He did not need to. He had policies, and policies sounded cleaner than prejudice. Dr. Victor Harlan gave Bell the money to make those policies glow. Harlan had been a surgeon once, before speeches and foundations polished him into something larger. His family name sat on wings, plaques, scholarship brochures, and the blue banners flapping over Calhoun Street. People called him generous because the hospital told them to, but generosity had made him hungry for control. He wanted the donor event flawless. No protest signs, no ugly billing disputes, no grieving families asking why a fund named for children had helped so few children without private insurance. The event would be filmed for the hospital website, then sent to sponsors in Atlanta and Washington. One bad clip could cost millions. That was why Bell called a staff briefing the day after Mara found the old tag. He stood in conference room B with a tablet in his hand while Ruth Park sat near the end of the table, arms folded over her badge. Beside Bell was Celia Brandt, the donor relations director, a woman with pearl earrings and a smile trained to close conversations. "We are entering a sensitive week," Bell said. "The event is not merely a ceremony. It is the public face of the New Hope Children's Fund." Celia nodded. "Every visitor in the atrium must have a badge, bracelet, or escort. A hospital-issued patient band does not count," Bell added. Ruth's pen stopped moving. Bell tapped the tablet. "We've had attempts lately to use financial hardship stories for leverage. We will be respectful, but we will not allow unscreened individuals to approach donors." Nobody said Mara's name. That was how Mercy Harbor worked. A person became a risk category before they became a face. After the briefing, Ruth caught Celia near the coffee station. "That girl who came yesterday," Ruth said. "Mara Velez. Her mother worked here." Celia stirred powdered creamer into her cup. "Lots of people worked here. Elena was lab staff for 20 years. If there's a current file, HR will handle it. There may be archived blood bank records tied to her." Celia's spoon paused against the cup. It made one small click. "Ruth," she said quietly, "this is not the week to go digging in dead files." The words confirmed what Ruth had feared. Not the full shape of it, but enough. Mara came back that afternoon because billing had told her to. She brought her ID, her school transcript, 2 pay stubs, the rent notice, and a folder so organized the clerk raised an eyebrow. The waiting room for financial assistance was not near the orchids. It was on the second floor behind frosted glass where the chairs were plastic and the vending machine $8 bills. A poster on the wall promised dignity. Someone had taped over a tear in the corner. Celia Brandt arrived before Mara's number was called. "Miss Velez," she said, "I can speak with you privately." Mara followed her into a small office with no window. Celia closed the door but did not sit. "I understand you're seeking assistance." "I'm asking for my mother's employment record," Mara said. "Billing called me. Those are separate matters. They keep becoming the same matter." Celia's smile cooled. "You're 17. That can make systems feel personal when they aren't." Mara held the folder against her ribs. "Systems are made of people." For half a second, Celia's polite mask slipped. Then she placed a single sheet on the desk. It was a release form. If Mara signed, Mercy Harbor would review her emergency balance for charity assistance. In exchange, she agreed not to enter restricted donor areas, disrupt hospital events, record staff without permission, or make public claims involving employee records until the review was complete. Mara read it twice. My mom taught me not to sign a paper when the favor comes first and the silence comes after. Celia's eyes sharpened. This is a standard behavioral agreement. Then why does it mention employee records? The office grew too quiet. Celia reached for the form. If you're unwilling to cooperate, assistance may not be available. Mara kept her hand on the paper. Can I get a copy? No. Then, can you write that you offered it? No. Mara slid the form back, but before Celia took it, her phone buzzed. A reminder flashed across the screen. Rent. 9 days. Celia saw it. Her voice softened in a way that felt worse than anger. I know you're under pressure. That's exactly why you should let adults handle this properly. Mara stood. Adults handled my mother properly until she disappeared from every file. She left without signing. In the hallway, she almost ran into Ruth, who was carrying a red biohazard cooler. Ruth took in Mara's face, the folder, and Celia's office door. What did they give you? A silence paper. Ruth exhaled through her nose. Did you sign? No. Good. Mara hesitated, then pulled the plastic sleeve halfway from her hoodie pocket. The old red tag showed just enough for Ruth to see the blood hold sticker and the faded code beneath it. Ruth's hand tightened around the cooler handle. Where did you get that? My mother's sewing tin. Ruth glanced down the hallway. 2 security cameras watched from the ceiling. A volunteer pushed a wheelchair past them, humming softly, unaware that the air had changed. Ruth lowered her voice. Do not show that to Graham Bell. Not yet. Why? Because if that tag is what I think it is, someone has spent a long time hoping it stayed lost. Mara's throat went dry. What is it? Ruth did not answer directly. She reached into her scrub pocket and gave Mara a blank request form. Ask for the blood bank archive by unit code. Put the code from the tag here. Date it. Keep a photo before you submit it. I thought those records were medical. They are, Ruth said, and medical records don't disappear as easily as personnel files. At the far end of the hall, Bell came out of the elevator with Dr. Harlan. Harlan's voice carried just enough. I want no surprises at the event. Bell answered, There won't be. Then Harlan noticed Mara. His eyes settled on the plastic sleeve in her hand, only for a second, but it was long enough for Ruth to shift her body between him and the girl. Bell followed Harlan's gaze. Mara Velez, he said, as if reading her name from a warning list. I believe our staff has already addressed your... Mara tucked the sleeve away. Her pulse kicked hard, but her voice stayed level. No, she said. They addressed your situation. Ruth's mouth almost twitched. Bell's expression did not change, yet the hallway felt smaller around him. You should be careful, he said. Hospitals have rules for a reason. Mara thought of her mother's recipe card. Keep your records cleaner. So do records, she said. That night, after work, Mara photographed the old tag under the kitchen light, filled out Ruth's request form, and hid the plastic sleeve inside the lining of her mother's winter coat. By morning, Mercy Harbor's security desk had her name printed on a watch list, and Bell had moved the donor event up by 2 days. The blood bank archive request came back denied in less than 4 hours. Mara found the message during her lunch break behind the grocery bakery, sitting on an overturned milk crate while the smell of warm bread drifted through the loading area. The email was short, unsigned, and written in the language of closed doors. Request cannot be processed. Insufficient authorization. No explanation. No appeal contact. No proof that anyone had searched. Mara took a screenshot, then forwarded it to the legal aid volunteer with the subject line Ruth had suggested. Medical record access concern. Her thumb hovered over send. If she pushed too hard, Mercy Harbor could flag her as difficult and cut off any chance of charity assistance. If she did nothing, the rent clock kept moving. 7 days now. 7 days before her mother's winter coat, the sewing tin, the recipe card, and every ordinary proof that Elena had existed could end up in trash bags. Mara pressed send. That evening, when she arrived at the dental office, the owner met her before she could clock in. He would not meet her eyes. "I got a call from Mercy Harbor," he said. "Something about you entering restricted areas and creating a disturbance." Mara's hand tightened around her time card. "I didn't disturb anything. I'm not saying you did. But they're a big referral partner. I can't have complications." He gave her an envelope with her last 2 days of pay. No warning, no shift, no chance to explain. Outside, the parking lot lights clicked on one by one. Mara opened the envelope and counted $86. Her bus pass expired Friday. For a minute, the anger felt too large for her body. Then she heard her mother's voice in memory, calm as a hand on a fever. "Write it down before you cry." So Mara sat on the curb, opened her notebook, and recorded the time, the name of the person who fired her, and the exact words about the hospital call. She did cry after that, but only for 3 minutes. She timed it with the cracked screen on her phone because grief had to fit between buses now. The next morning, Ruth called from a blocked number. "They're asking who helped you with the archive request," Ruth said. "I didn't tell them, I know. That's not why I called." A pause. "There's a blood drive tomorrow in the employee clinic. They're short rare type donors. Your mother had AB negative marked on old lab rosters. If you inherited it, they may ask you to donate." Mara almost laughed. "They don't want me in the building. They don't want you near donors. They still want blood." The sentence hung between them. Ruth continued. "If you go, they'll put a current tag on you. It will have your type, collection time, and unit code. Keep it. Do not let anyone throw it away. Why would that matter? Because the old tag in your pocket may not belong to a unit your mother received. It may belong to a unit she donated." Mara gripped the phone. Her mother had been a phlebotomy tech, not a wealthy donor. Her name was not on any wall. There was no plaque for women who came in after a 12-hour shift and gave blood because the pediatric fridge was short. Ruth's voice softened. Elena used to donate when babies needed rare matches, quietly. She never wanted attention. Then, why hide the tag? Because one donation may have been credited to someone else. Mara knew the answer before Ruth said the name. Harlan. The word formed silently in her mouth, heavy and dangerous. Ruth warned her not to accuse anyone yet. There had to be proof clean enough that Belle could not call it a misunderstanding. The old tag was emotional proof, yes, but it needed one factual confirmation. Ruth believed the original unit code would match an archived ledger page if they could get the page through proper channels. One page, Ruth said, not a mountain of files. One ledger entry with the donor name and unit code. How do I get it? You request it again in person. You ask for patient records, not HR. And you bring a witness. Mara had one witness available. Her school counselor, Denise Harper, had been helping seniors with college forms since Mara was a freshman. She was plain-spoken, allergic to excuses, and served part-time on the Charleston County Youth Health Board. Mara had never asked her for anything outside school, but when she showed Denise the denial email and the release form Celia had tried to keep, Denise's face hardened. "They gave you a gag agreement tied to medical assistance? They called it behavioral." Denise pushed her glasses up. "Of course they did." By noon, Denise had arranged to meet Mara at Mercy Harbor after school. The plan was simple. Submit the request. Ask for a receipt. Leave with a dated copy. No confrontation. Belle made sure it became something else. Security stopped Mara at the side entrance. The guard was not cruel, just embarrassed. He had her name on a clipboard and instructions to contact administration if she arrived. Denise showed her county board ID and that was the only reason they were allowed into the lobby. Bell came down himself. He wore a gray suit and a donor event lapel pin. The pin looked almost military on him, as if generosity had ranks. "Miss Velez," he said, "you've been advised about proper channels." Denise answered before Mara could. "I'm Denise Harper. I'm here as a witness while she requests access to a record." Bell's smile adjusted. A minor's medical requests can be complicated. She's requesting a blood bank archive connected to her deceased mother's donation record. Then she lacks standing. Mara took the completed form from her folder. "I'm asking you to deny it in writing." Bell did not touch the paper. "Your mother's employment ended under circumstances you may not understand," he said. "I would be careful about attaching your name to hers in public." That was the personal cut. Clean, controlled, meant to make Mara wonder if Elena had done something shameful. Denise's jaw tightened. Ruth, watching from near the elevators, lowered her clipboard. Mara felt the old instinct to apologize for needing anything. Instead, she held the form steady. "My name is already attached to hers." Bell's voice dropped. "You're making a mistake." "No," Mara said. "I'm making a record." Denise took out her phone and photographed the form in Mara's hand, Bell refusing to accept it, and the wall clock above the desk. One image, one timestamp, supporting proof. If the hospital tried to claim the request, never happened. Bell's eyes flicked to the phone. "Recording is prohibited." "It's a still photo," Denise said. "And this is a public lobby." Celia Brandt appeared beside him, carrying a folder with Mara's name typed on a label. "Graham, the rehearsal starts in 10 minutes. Bell used that excuse like a door. "Submit it by mail," he said. Mara placed the request form on the information desk before he could stop her. Then she asked the volunteer for a receipt number. The volunteer, an older man with shaking hands, stamped the bottom corner. Bell stared at the ink as if it had insulted him. Failed, he would terminate the lease. It was not a hospital threat on paper. It was worse. It was a message with clean hands. Mara sat on the kitchen floor with her mother's coat in her lap. The plastic sleeve was still hidden in the lining. She could take the next bus out of Charleston, sleep on Denise's couch, let the apartment go, let the tag become another secret that cost too much to carry. Instead, she opened the seam of the coat, removed the old tag, and placed it beside her own blank donor appointment slip for the next morning. Then she wrote 3 copies of everything, one for Denise, one for Ruth, one for herself. By sunrise, Mara had decided something Bell had not considered. If Mercy Harbor wanted her blood badly enough to tag it, she would let them, and she would keep the tag. Mara donated blood in a beige room behind Employee Health, where the walls were covered with posters about teamwork. Nobody asked why an uninsured teenager was suddenly useful. A young tech checked her ID, confirmed her type, and brightened at the screen. A B negative, rare enough to make everyone move a little faster. The tech printed a red patient tag, matched it to the collection bag, and wrapped Mara's wrist with the same practiced motion Elena had once used on strangers. Mara watched every step. Needle, tube, label, time, initials, unit code. Her mother had taught her that blood was never supposed to become anonymous. Every drop needed a chain, a record, a name that could be followed back if something went wrong. Mara had grown up hearing those words while Elena packed lunch before dawn. When the donation ended, the tech reached for scissors. "I'll take that band off." Mara pulled her arm back gently. "I need to keep it. Policy says we dispose of used identifiers. Then write that I refused disposal." The tech blinked. She was not used to patients speaking incomplete records. After a short call to a supervisor, she let Mara leave wearing it, but not before noting the refusal in the system. Ruth was waiting near the service elevator. "Good," she said when she saw the tag. Mara's face was still pale from donating. "They're going to say I broke a rule. They already planned to." Ruth handed her a sealed envelope. Denise got this through the county board request. It came faster because the hospital is receiving public youth health funds. Mara did not open it in the hall. Is it the ledger page? One page, Ruth said. Unit code, donor name, recipient hold, date. Mara's fingers tightened around the envelope. Ruth leaned closer. Do not show it until there are witnesses who can't be quietly managed. That moment came sooner than either of them wanted. The donor event began 2 days early, under white lights and blue banners, with donors gathered in the atrium and staff positioned like furniture. Celia Brandt moved from group to group with a clipboard, smiling too brightly. Dr. Harlan stood near the stage, accepting compliments about the pediatric wing. Belle watched the entrances. Mara did not sneak in. She walked through the front doors wearing clean jeans, her least faded hoodie, the bent key under her collar, and the red tag on her wrist. Denise came with her, carrying a small folder. Ruth stayed near the back with lab envelopes tucked against her side. Security stopped Mara halfway across the atrium. Belle saw her and made the worst choice available to a man who loved control. He made it public. Within seconds, the donors could hear him. The cameras for the hospital website caught him moving toward the girl. Celia's smile faltered, then fixed itself again. Dr. Harlan remained on the stage, but the hand resting on the podium curled. Belle demanded the tag be removed. He called Mara uninsured. He called her a disruption. He told security to take her through the service hallway, the same hallway where workers and frightened families went when the front entrance had no place for them. Mara said only one thing at first. Please don't touch the tag. That should have been enough. Belle reached for the display tray. Now the room was no longer watching a misunderstanding. They were watching an adult man prepare to cut a medical identifier from a teenage girl's wrist while the hospital's name glowed behind him. Denise stepped forward. Mr. Bell, stop. Belle did not even glance at her. This individual has been repeatedly warned. She is a minor requesting records tied to a public fund. She is trespassing. Mara's knees felt loose. The donation had left her lightheaded, and the atrium lights seemed too sharp. But she kept her wrist close to her chest and felt the old tag in the plastic sleeve inside her pocket. Belle's voice rose, polished for the crowd. Miss Velez has chosen to harass this institution during a charitable event. She has refused assistance, refused policy, and now appears wearing medical property as a prop. The word prop hit harder than the accusation. Mara thought of Elena's hands, always warm from washing, always careful with other people's pain. She thought of her mother coming home with sore feet, hanging that bent key beside the sink, saying Mercy Harbor helped children because somebody had to. A prop. Belle lifted the scissors. Dr. Harlan finally spoke. Graham, leave it. But the warning came too late to be mistaken for kindness. It sounded like fear. Mara heard it. So did Ruth. Celia tried to redirect the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can return our attention to the ribbon— No, Denise said. One word, firm enough to pull several phones higher. Belle's smile vanished. Ms. Harper, you are interfering with hospital operations. I'm witnessing them. A donor in a navy blazer asked, why is she wearing a blood tag? Belle answered too quickly. Because she wants attention. Mara's hand went to the bent key at her throat. The small silver shape slipped free of her collar. Harlan saw it fully now. His face did not go pale. Men like him trained themselves against visible fear. But his mouth tightened, and the polished warmth drained from his eyes. Belle noticed the shift, but misread it as impatience. Enough, he said. He reached for Mara's wrist again. Mara backed into the display table. Her hip struck the corner, and a stack of donor programs slid to the floor. The front page showed Harlan smiling beside the words, 20 years of life-saving gifts. A few guests murmured. One woman whispered, she's just a child. Belle heard that too, and it made him crueler. She is 17, he said, old enough to understand consequences. Then he turned to Mara and lowered his voice, but the nearest phones caught every word. You want consequences? Your financial review is over. Your account will go to collections. Any false public accusation you make today will be referred to counsel. And if you continue, I will personally make sure every employer who calls this hospital knows you are a liability. Mara's lips parted. There it was. Not policy, punishment. The sacred thing he threatened was not just money or rent. It was the future Elena had died trying to leave behind. A record clean enough for her daughter to stand on. Mara almost folded. She could see it happen. Apologize, leave, protect the apartment for another week. Stop pulling at the thread. The room would exhale. Bell would turn back into a respectable man. Harlan would cut the ribbon. Her mother's name would stay buried beneath bronze letters that did not belong to her. Ruth moved at the back of the room. The envelope slipped from her tray and scattered exactly as if by accident. Papers fanned across the floor. One old photocopied label slid into view near a donor's shoe. Celia reached for it. Denise got there first. She picked up the page, read the unit code, then raised her eyes to Mara. The signal was small, but it was enough. Mara pulled the plastic sleeve from her pocket. Bell froze for half a beat. Mara held up the old tag beside the new one on her wrist. 2 red identifiers, 2 rare codes, 2 pieces of blood history separated by 20 years and 1 missing name. The atrium's comfortable noise fell away. Ruth stepped forward, no longer pretending to drop anything. "This," she said, voice steady, "is why I asked the lab to preserve the archive request." Bell snapped, "Ruth, you will not speak." But at the entrance, a woman in a dark suit had just arrived with a hospital board badge clipped to her jacket. Her name was Angela Price, chair of the compliance committee, and Denise had called her before Mara ever walked through the front doors. Price took in the scissors, the red tags, the phones, the donors, and Bell's hand still hovering in the air. Then she said the words Bell had spent all week avoiding. "Nobody leaves. I want this on the record. Angela." Price did not raise her voice. That made people listen harder. She moved between Mara and Bell, then held out one hand toward the scissors. Bell hesitated only a second before placing them on the display table. The metal made a small sound against the glass, too sharp for such a public room. "Miss Velez," Price said, "are you here voluntarily?" Mara nodded. "Did anyone instruct you to cause a disruption?" "No." Bell cut in. "Angela, this is exactly what I warned the board about. She has been coached by staff with personal grudges. Price did not give him the argument he wanted. Then the record will show that." Harlan left the stage slowly. The donors made space for him the way people make space for money. He came to stand near Bell, not beside Mara, and rested one hand against the back of a chair. His voice was smooth again. "This young woman appears distressed. Perhaps we should handle this privately." Mara almost smiled at that word. Privately was where poor patients were sent to be corrected. Privately was where forms disappeared. Privately was where her mother's name had been folded away until it no longer troubled the wall. Denise Harper spoke from Mara's left. "There are public funds attached to this event. She has a right to be heard." Celia Brandt's face tightened. "This is not a hearing." "No," Price said. "But it is now a compliance incident." That phrase moved through the crowd like a cold draft. Bell tried to recover. "Fine. Let her show whatever prop she brought, and then we return to the program." Mara lifted the plastic sleeve. "This belonged to my mother," she said. Bell gave a short, dismissive breath. "An old medical label proves nothing. People keep souvenirs from hospitals all the time." Ruth stepped forward. "It is not a souvenir." Bell's eyes flashed. "Ruth." Price raised one finger, and he stopped. Ruth kept her hands visible, as if she were handling blood instead of memory. Elena Velez worked in the lab. She donated rare blood when pediatric units were short. I was trained by her. I saw her do it more than once. Bell seized on the gap. "You saw donations 20 years ago? That is hardly evidence of anything today." "It confirms she was a donor," Ruth said, "and that she knew how to preserve a tag correctly." A donor near the front, the woman with the champagne flute, asked quietly, Why would someone need to preserve it? Mara answered, before anyone else could turn her life back into policy. Because someone took her name off it. The old tag trembled once in her hand, then steadied. She held it beside the current red band on her wrist, aligning the labels so the room could see the matching rare type code. One tag was brittle and faded, the other was fresh, printed that morning after Mercy Harbor accepted her blood without hesitation. My mother kept this in a sewing tin for years, Mara said, with a note that said, "If they ever erase me, start here." I didn't understand it. Then this hospital told me her personnel file was gone. They denied my archive request. They tried to make me sign a paper promising not to speak publicly about employee records. Celia said, "That is an unfair characterization." Denise opened her folder. I photographed the agreement before it was pulled back. Belle's mouth compressed, but Price held up a hand again. Mara did not hand over the moment. She removed the old tag from the sleeve carefully, keeping it by the edges, and placed it on the glass table where the scissors had been. "This is the proof my mother left me," she said. "Not because it has a code, because she knew her work would be stolen if all anyone remembered was a rich man's name." Harlan's expression hardened. "Young lady, you should be very careful." Mara met his gaze. "I am being careful." Then Denise gave her the single page from the envelope. Not a stack. Not a flood of documents no one in the atrium could follow. One archived blood bank ledger page copied through the county board's request because the New Hope Children's Fund used public youth health money. Mara held it up. "Unit code 7B-14-ABN," she read. Date, March 3, 2004. Donor name, Elena Velez. Pediatric surgical hold. Ruth nodded once. "That matches the old tag." Mara read the next line, and the air changed. External donor credit entered later under Harlan Family Foundation. The woman with the champagne flute covered her mouth. Belle snapped, "That is an accounting notation." "No," Ruth said. "Blood donor credit and financial donor credit are separate fields. They were never supposed to replace a person's name." Price took the page from Mara and examined it. Her face gave away very little, but her shoulders squared. "Who entered the later credit?" she asked. Ruth pointed to the initials at the bottom. Celia whispered, "Graham." Belle reached for the page. Price moved it out of his reach. "This ledger is hospital property," he said. "So was the tag you tried to cut off my wrist," Mara said. That short sentence landed harder than anything shouted could have. Several phones were recording now, not secretly, openly. Donors who had arrived to clap for a ribbon were watching the hospital's public face break into pieces. Harlan tried a warmer tone. "There may have been a clerical error. My foundation has supported this hospital for decades. We would never knowingly accept credit for an individual's medical donation." Mara kept her voice calm. "Then say her name." He blinked. The request was simple enough that refusing it became its own confession. Mara lifted the old tag again, not toward the donors, but toward him. "Say my mother's name." Harlan's jaw flexed. Belle shifted beside him. Celia stared at the floor. The banner above the stage moved faintly in the air conditioning. Harlan said nothing. Mara nodded as if she had expected it. "She donated blood for a child who needed a rare match," Mara said. "Your foundation took the donor credit. Your name went on the program. Hers vanished from the file. And when I came asking, Mr. Bell tried to make me disappear too." Bell broke then, not loudly, but visibly. "This is absurd," he said. "She is manipulating grief. She has no insurance, no standing, and no understanding of how institutions operate." Mara slid the ledger page back to Price. "I understand enough," she said. Then she turned, not to Bell, not to Harlan, but to the room. "I am requesting a formal review of the New Hope Children's Fund, the blood bank archive, and every donor credit tied to my mother's unit code. I am also asking the hospital to preserve all records connected to my financial assistance file and the employment records of Elena Velez." Price answered immediately. Recorded. That was Mara's decisive moment. She did not ask to be rescued. She did not beg anyone to believe her. She made the request in public, with the proof in her hand, and witnesses who could not unhear it. Bell pointed toward security. "Remove her." The guard did not move. Price faced him. "Mr. Bell, you are relieved from event duties pending review. Angela, you cannot do that in the middle of— I can suspend your authority over this incident, and I am doing so now." The donor event had stopped being a celebration. Celia stepped away from the ribbon as if it were hot. Harlan looked toward the cameras and seemed to realize too late that every angle was bad. Price turned to the guests. "The program is paused. The board will issue a statement after outside counsel reviews the documents. Anyone with recordings of the interaction may provide them to compliance." A murmur spread through the atrium, but this time it did not protect Bell. "Miss Velez," he said softly, "I'm sure your mother was a good woman. We can discuss an appropriate acknowledgement." Mara did not take the bait. "My mother did not need your acknowledgement," she said. "She needed you not to steal her name." The words stayed in the air after she finished. Ruth pressed a hand to her own badge. Denise's eyes shone, but she did not interrupt. Price folded the ledger page into a clean evidence sleeve from her bag. Bell stood beside the donor wall with his lapel pin crooked, suddenly looking less like an administrator and more like a man whose power depended on everyone staying polite. The guard opened a path, not to the service hallway, but through the center of the atrium. Mara walked it slowly. The red tag remained on her wrist. The old tag rested in Price's evidence sleeve. The bent key lay warm against her chest. Behind her, the ribbon was never cut. By sunset, Mercy Harbor had locked the donor wall behind temporary panels. Not removed, not fixed, just covered. That was how institutions reacted when the truth arrived with witnesses. First, they hid the shiny part. Then they called lawyers. Then, if enough people kept watching, they called it accountability. Angela Price kept her word. Outside counsel arrived that night. Bell's hospital email was suspended before morning, and his access to billing, records, and donor relations was frozen pending review. Celia Brandt was placed on administrative leave after the compliance team found the release form in her event folder. Dr. Harlan did not lose everything in one dramatic hour. Men like him rarely do. But by the end of that week, the hospital board paused the New Hope Children's Fund, canceled Harlan's speaking role, and removed his foundation from all new donor materials until the review was complete. The local news did not call him a criminal. It called the matter an investigation, which was slower, colder, and harder for him to charm. Mara watched none of the coverage live. Denise made her eat first. They sat at a small diner near Montague Avenue, where the waitress refilled Mara's water 3 times and never asked why her hands were shaking. Ruth came after her shift and slid into the booth with a paper bag of muffins from the hospital cafeteria. "Your mother used to steal these," Ruth said, then corrected herself. "Borrow permanently." Mara laughed once and it surprised her. The next morning, Mercy Harbor sent a formal notice. Mara's financial assistance file would remain open, her account would not be sent to collections, and retaliation concerns would be referred to outside counsel. Denise read every line before Mara believed any of it. 2 days later, the landlord withdrew the inspection threat after receiving a letter from legal aid. He claimed there had been a misunderstanding. Mara did not argue. She paid what she could, accepted a short emergency rental grant, and kept the receipt in her notebook. Her records were cleaner than her life, but for now, that was enough. 3 weeks after the event, Price called Mara back to the hospital. Not to the atrium. To a small conference room with blinds half open and a pitcher of water on the table. Denise sat beside Mara. Ruth stood near the door because she said chairs made her nervous in meetings with lawyers. Price placed a folder in front of Mara. "We found your mother's archived personnel record," she said. Mara did not touch it at first. The file was thin. Too thin for 20 years of work. But Elena's name was there. Start date, lab assignment, donation eligibility, staff fund contribution history, enough to prove she had belonged to the place that later tried to make her vanish. Price's voice softened. The survivor benefit should have been offered after her death. It wasn't. The hospital will correct that with back benefit payment, legal assistance for you, and a written apology. Mara stared at the folder. Money mattered. It meant rent, bus fare, a working phone, maybe community college without choosing between books and groceries. But the line that broke her open was not the dollar amount. It was Elena Velez, laboratory services, active staff donor. Active staff donor. 3 words no bronze wall had been willing to hold. Price continued. The board also voted to establish an annual staff donor record audit. Any medical or blood donation credit connected to public fundraising will require source verification. Your mother's donation will be restored in the archive under her name. Ruth wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and pretended she had not. Mara asked one question. Will her name go on the wall? Price paused. If you want it to. Mara thought about the marble atrium, the cameras, the way people had backed away when Belle said uninsured. She thought about her mother's bent key, worn smooth by a woman who never needed a stage to save someone. No, Mara said, not that wall. So Mercy Harbor made a different one. It was not in the donor atrium. It was outside the blood bank near the side entrance where workers came in with tired feet and lunch bags. A simple plaque, no marble, no portrait. Elena Velez, Staff Donor Archive. For those whose quiet gifts must never be erased. Under it, the hospital installed a small locked box where staff could request copies of their own service and donation records without going through donor relations. Ruth said Elena would have liked that better than flowers. Belle resigned before the review was finished. The official language said he did so to avoid becoming a distraction. The unofficial truth was simpler. The videos had made him impossible to protect. His license as a hospital administrator came under state review, and the board referred the donor credit issue for further investigation. Harlan's foundation survived, but not untouched. Sponsors suspended funding. His name came down from the pediatric wing while the board renegotiated the gift agreement. For years, he had mistaken visibility for goodness. Now, every room that once praised him was asking who had been hidden to make that praise possible. Mara did not forgive him. She did not need to. By fall, she was taking evening classes in medical records technology at Trident Technical College. Ruth helped her find part-time work in a clinic where the supervisor cared more about accuracy than polish. Denise still checked her forms, though Mara needed less help every month. The old blood tag stayed in a clear case on Mara's desk. Her own red tag was there too, flattened beside it. 2 pieces of plastic, one faded, one new, both carrying the same lesson. A name can be stolen only when everyone agrees not to read it. On the first cool morning of November, Mara took the bent key from around her neck and hung it beside her mother's plaque outside the blood bank. Just for a minute. Then she pressed her fingers to Elena's name and whispered, "They know where to find you now." She put the key back under her collar before leaving through the side entrance, the one her mother had used for 20 years. The sun was coming up over Charleston, pale and ordinary. Nurses hurried in. A custodian balanced coffee on his cart. Somewhere behind the wall, blood bags waited in careful rows, each one labeled, tracked, and tied to a human being who mattered. Mara walked to the bus stop with her notebook under her arm. This time, she was not carrying proof because she was afraid they would erase her. She was carrying records because her mother had taught her how to stay real. And maybe that is the question this story leaves us with. How many quiet people hold a place together while someone louder takes the credit? If Mara's courage moved you, tell me in the comments whose name you think deserves to be remembered. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who finally make the truth impossible to ignore.